Growing up, it was just Dad and me. My mother died when I was 5, too young to remember her voice, but just old enough to feel the echo of her absence in everything we did. My father filled in every blank space with love. He was gentle but firm, present at every school play, and the first to clap the loudest. He braided my hair with the patience of someone who had never touched a comb before and learned how to cook so I wouldn't grow up on boxed noodles. He used to call me his greatest gift, not just in passing either. Every birthday, every milestone, every time I brought home an A or offered to help with chores. That phrase felt like a promise, a reminder that no matter what, we were in this life together. When I was 14, he met Clarissa. She was everything my mother never had the chance to be. Glamorous, well-spoken, a woman who knew how to command attention the moment she entered a room. She worked in interior design and wore heels in the house. When she first came over for dinner, she complimented my posture and brought wine my father couldn't pronounce. He looked at her like he'd been holding his breath for years and was finally allowed to exhale. At first, I didn't mind her. Clarissa was charming. She bought me little gifts, lip gloss, scarves, nail polish. She asked about my favorite color and helped me pick out my dress for homecoming. She said we'd be like real family, that she'd always be around for girl talk. But as time passed, her warmth grew colder. She stopped joining us for breakfast. She began criticizing my clothes, my tone, my friends. Her praise turned sharp, passive-aggressive. "You're smart, just not very emotionally aware," she once said when I cried after she yelled at me for using her shampoo. Still, I tried. I wanted to keep peace. My dad seemed happier, lighter, and I didn't want to ruin that. So I let her correct me. I let her rearrange the furniture in the house my mother helped build. I let her call the shots at family dinners and change the channel when we used to watch cartoons together. She started managing his schedule, attending business meetings with him, and offering suggestions about how I could be more responsible. But I still trusted him. My father. The man who had kissed scraped knees and built blanket forts. He couldn't possibly be blind to what was happening. When I left for college, I believed I was making both of them proud. I studied hard, called home every weekend, and came back during breaks to a house that felt less like mine with each visit. Clarissa's presence had spread through it like perfume, suffocating, strong, and inescapable. Still, my father reassured me. He promised that the house, the only one I'd ever called home, would always be mine. That one day, I'd run the marketing division of his company. That he was proud of me, always proud of me. So I kept building my life around that promise. I didn't see the shift happening. I didn't notice how Clarissa had begun replacing not just furniture, but memories. How photos of my mother vanished from walls, and eventually, so did I. From conversations, plans, the future. But I held on to one belief. I was his daughter. That meant something. That would always mean something. He used to call me his greatest gift. I didn't know gifts could be returned. I should have known something was wrong when my key didn't work. It was a crisp Sunday afternoon, one of those golden days when the sun makes even old bricks look gentle. I was home from college, degree in hand, heart full, ready to start the next chapter of my life. The plan was always simple. Come home, work with Dad in the company, save up, and eventually take over the business he'd built from scratch. That's what we talked about in our late-night calls, our weekend brunches. He even said he was proud of me for graduating top of my class. But the front door didn't budge. I tried the key again. Nothing. I knocked. Nothing. Then I rang the bell and finally, it was Clarissa who opened the door, smiling faintly, dressed like she was headed to a gala. "Oh," she said, like she hadn't expected me. "You didn't get the message." I blinked. "What message?" She stepped aside just enough for me to see boxes. My boxes, neatly stacked in the foyer. Labeled in her handwriting. My father came down the stairs slowly, not looking me in the eye. He looked older somehow, smaller. "We didn't want to do it like this," he said. His tone was flat. "Robotic." "Do what?" I asked. My voice shook. He cleared his throat. "You're grown now. It's time you stood on your own feet. We've made arrangements. Clarissa helped you find a storage unit. The rest, you'll figure out. Didn't make sense. Nothing did. But I live here, I whispered. Clarissa's voice slid in like a silk noose. You lived here, sweetheart. You're an adult now. This is just what's best for everyone. Everyone but me, apparently. I stood there, numb, as my father refused to meet my eyes, and Clarissa handed me a manila envelope. Inside were papers detailing the removal of my name from the family trust, the will, the business. Everything had been transferred to her and her children. Quietly. Legally. Permanently. No warning. No discussion. Just erasure. I wasn't even offered a goodbye dinner. Just a locksmith and a signature on paper that made me legally invisible in the only place I'd ever called home. That night, I slept on my college roommate's couch, clutching the envelope to my chest like a corpse I hadn't buried yet. The betrayal wasn't loud. There were no screams, no slamming doors. Just silence, papers, and the sound of locks clicking shut. They didn't just kick me out, they cut me off like I was never born. For weeks, I moved through the world like a ghost. I crashed on my old college roommate's couch, paying rent in grocery bags and apologies. I worked double shifts at a bookstore and waited tables at night. My degrees collecting dust in a storage unit, just like the life I thought I had. My phone barely buzzed. No calls from my father. No check-ins. Not even a "how are you?" from Clarissa, the woman who once told me I was just like a daughter. The family I grew up in had evaporated without even the courtesy of a storm. First I cried in secret. Then I just stopped crying altogether. I became numb, eating only when my stomach ached, speaking only when spoken to. I felt like a stranger in my own reflection. Every piece of me had been tethered to that house, that legacy, that future. And without it, who was I? But pain has a strange way of sharpening your senses. One night, after a long shift, I opened my laptop and started digging, not for comfort but for facts. I researched inheritance law, power of attorney, emotional abuse in family structures. Article after article echoed a bitter truth. I wasn't the first daughter erased by a stepmother's hand or a father's cowardice. I was part of a pattern, quiet, legal, devastating. The rage didn't come all at once. It simmered, slow and steady. And then I found them, tucked in a box I hadn't opened since freshman year. Letters from my mother, written in her curvy, ink-heavy handwriting. One said, "If anything ever happens to me, know this. You are my whole world. Don't ever let someone rewrite your place in this family." And beneath the letters, folded like a secret, an older version of my father's will. Signed, witnessed. It named me the sole heir. The date. A year before he married Clarissa. My hands trembled. My breath caught in my throat. That night I didn't sleep. I wrote. I journaled until the sun came up. Every memory, every insult disguised as advice, every time Clarissa accidentally made me feel small. I started seeing the manipulation clearly. The way she chipped away at my confidence while playing loving stepmother in front of my dad. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't weak. I had been groomed to believe silence was grace and obedience was loyalty. But something had shifted now. I wasn't disowned. I was erased. But even shadows remember the sun. Revenge doesn't always wear red lipstick and stilettos. Sometimes it wears reading glasses and speaks fluent legalese. After uncovering the original will and my mother's letters, I knew I had more than just heartbreak. I had ammunition. But this fight wasn't going to be waged with emotion. It needed strategy, precision, and a quiet kind of fury. So I did what Clarissa never expected. I stayed calm and got smarter. I booked a consultation with a probate attorney known for inheritance fraud cases. Her office was small but efficient. No marble floors or glass elevators, just walls lined with case files and a woman who looked like she'd seen every dirty family secret in the book. She listened quietly as I laid out my story. Every detail, every letter, every lie. I watched her eyebrows rise slowly, then flatten into a hardened line. "You've got something," she said. "Actually, you've got more than something. If even half of what you're saying is documented, We're looking at a serious case of undue influence and potential fraud. It wasn't just about the newer will that left everything to Clarissa. It was the sudden change after my father's health scare, the timeline that aligned suspiciously well with his hospitalization, and the erasure of a legally binding trust my mother had set up to ensure my protection. Clarissa hadn't just manipulated my father. She had preyed on him when he was vulnerable, and rewritten a legacy with her name in every margin. We began building the case. I handed over everything. The copy of the original will, my mother's letters, screenshots of old emails where Clarissa hinted at streamlining the estate, and a voice message from a distant cousin recalling how Clarissa boasted that everything would be hers soon enough. But the gold mine came from an unexpected place, one of my father's former employees at his business. I remembered him from my childhood. Gray hair, always in flannel, and kind eyes that made me feel seen even when Clarissa was making me invisible. When I tracked him down and explained why I was asking questions, his tone shifted from polite to protective. "Your dad wasn't himself those last few months," he said. "She was always hovering, taking calls for him, pushing papers in front of him. He signed things without reading." He even remembered Clarissa whispering to an accountant about making the numbers cleaner, while my father was still recovering from surgery. The attorney added his testimony to the file, along with documented financial transfers from my father's personal accounts to Clarissa's just before the will was updated. One account, meant for my college fund, had been liquidated entirely. And then came the final piece. Buried in the original trust documents from my mother's estate was a clause, one that had never been mentioned in the updated version. It read, "Under no circumstance shall these assets be diverted from my daughter by remarriage or manipulation." My mother had tried to protect me from beyond the grave. Now it was my turn to protect her intentions. I didn't scream. I didn't warn them. I didn't send a dramatic text or storm the house demanding justice. Instead, I signed a formal legal challenge. My attorney filed it under seal to prevent interference. Clarissa and my father had no idea what was coming. I walked away from the courthouse not with vengeance in my heart, but with clarity. I wasn't the broken girl on the couch anymore. I was a woman walking in her own power, backed by truth, law, and a paper trail too long to ignore. They thought they buried me in fine print. But I was the clause they overlooked. If they wanted to treat me like a stranger, they forgot what strangers can do in court. Courtrooms are colder than they look in movies. No grand music, no gasps from the crowd, just polished floors, tired eyes, and the echo of truth waiting for its turn. Clarissa arrived in a tailored navy suit, her hair in a glossy twist, wearing the face of a woman who believed she'd already won. My father walked beside her, stoic and distant. I didn't recognize him anymore. Not the man who once carried me on his shoulders or kissed my forehead goodnight. He was a ghost wearing my father's name. They sat across from me, smug in their silence. I sat with my attorney, calm in mine. The judge began, listing the case and summarizing the challenge I'd filed. Undue influence, financial fraud, breach of fiduciary responsibility. Clarissa didn't flinch. My father just blinked. Then the documents came out. My lawyer spoke first, laying out a timeline so sharp it cut through Clarissa's performance like glass. Dates of my father's illness. Medical records showing cognitive decline. Asset transfers with questionable signatures. Emails where Clarissa referred to the inheritance as a problem she was finally solving. I watched as Clarissa's lips thinned. Her foot tapped rapidly, her confidence beginning to splinter. Next, we called in Mr. Dalton, my father's former employee. He testified that Clarissa had been handling everything during my father's recovery, pressuring staff to keep silent. He described how my father's mood had shifted after she insisted on managing his communication. My father shifted in his seat. For the first time he looked uncertain. And then it was my turn. I stood up, letter in hand. My voice trembled, not with fear, but with the weight of what I was about to share. "This was written by my mother," I began, "months before she passed. It was addressed to my father, but it speaks for me now. I unfolded the worn paper and read aloud. If I don't make it, promise me you'll protect her. Not just from the world, but from any woman who dares to call herself family but treats her like a rival. Do not let her be rewritten, replaced, or forgotten. She is our legacy. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was electric. Clarissa's hands twitched. Her voice, when it finally broke through, was high and defensive. This is a witch hunt. He signed the new will. He made that choice. The judge raised a hand to silence her. This court has reviewed the original will, the medical documentation, and verified signatures from both versions. The discrepancies are clear. The influence undue. The intent of the deceased unquestionable. I looked at my father. He didn't look angry. He looked lost. Like someone waking from anesthesia to discover the house is on fire. The judge continued. The court rules in favor of the petitioner. The original estate plan is hereby reinstated. All assets, including the family home, business shares, and liquid funds, will be transferred back under the terms of the first will. Clarissa gasped. My father didn't move. It was done. As we left the courtroom, Clarissa refused to look at me. My father tried, but whatever he meant to say got caught somewhere in his throat and never made it out. And I didn't need it. I had stood in front of both of them, the woman who erased me and the man who let her, and claimed back what was always mine. Not just the house, the money, or the shares, but the truth, the legacy, the promise my mother made and the voice they tried to bury. They buried me in betrayal. I unearthed their lies and my legacy. The house looked smaller when I returned. Not physically. Every wall and window still stood where I remembered, but the weight it once carried had shifted. It wasn't home because of memories anymore. It was home because I had reclaimed it. I didn't move in with fanfare. I brought a single suitcase and a deep breath. The first thing I did was take down the portrait Clarissa had hung of her family in the foyer, the one where I'd been airbrushed out like a mistake. I replaced it with a framed copy of my mother's letter, the one that helped save me. The next weeks were full of dust, hammering, and quiet satisfaction. I tore up the carpet in the living room. Clarissa always insisted on beige. I painted it sea glass green, the color my mother once wanted before Clarissa called it childish. The bedroom I used to cry in. Now a small home office and guest room, furnished with soft light and stronger purpose. But it wasn't just about walls and wood. It was about rewriting the purpose of what I'd inherited. I set aside part of the money I'd recovered and started something my mother would have loved. A fund for young women who had been disowned or emotionally abandoned by family. The first grant helped a college student whose parents kicked her out for refusing to follow a career they chose. Another helped a woman fleeing a controlling stepmother who drained her savings. That felt more like justice than anything the court could ever award me. My father wrote me a letter, weeks after the ruling. He didn't ask for reconciliation. He simply said, I didn't see it until it was too late. I thought I was doing what was right. But I see now it was just what was easy. He blamed Clarissa, said she changed him, that he missed me. I didn't respond. Letting someone back into your life isn't the same as forgiveness. And forgiveness doesn't mean pretending the fire never happened. Clarissa moved out quietly. No dramatic exit, no goodbye. She left behind a broken picture frame and a closet full of things that didn't belong. For the first time, the house exhaled. Eventually I started a blog. Not under my name, just as rewritten. I told my story in pieces with care. Not to shame anyone, but to offer something I'd once needed desperately. Proof that you're not alone. Emails and messages poured in. Women who had been erased. Daughters who had been replaced. People who weren't angry. They were just tired of hurting without being believed. I told them, healing isn't loud. It's not an Instagram-worthy quote. Sometimes it's putting a new lock on an old door. Sometimes it's choosing not to write back. I stand now where I used to be small. I walk through rooms where I was once unseen, and I fill them with my voice, my choices, my legacy. Not because I was welcomed back, but because I own it now. I walked out their daughter. I returned their reckoning. Peace doesn't arrive like a thunderclap. It tiptoes in soft, slow, and unapologetic. These days, I wake up without dread in my chest. My name isn't whispered in judgment or erased from documents. It's on business cards, legal titles, and a growing list of ments who see me not just as a survivor, but as a leader. I run a consultancy now, helping young women disentangle from toxic family dynamics, emotional and financial. Started as a blog, then a few calls. Now I mentor others, some still bruised from betrayals that mirror my own. Every time I hear their stories, I feel the ache of recognition, but no longer the pain. Just a quiet fire to keep building safe bridges where others burned theirs. The house is no longer a memory minefield. I remodeled it with warmth, reclaimed corners, and the kind of laughter that doesn't wait for permission. My mother's letter hangs framed above the desk where I sign contracts, pay invoices, and run what I built on the ashes they left me. My father hasn't written again. Clarissa disappeared like fog. No apology, no acknowledgement. But I don't need it. Some doors, once closed, stay that way for your own good. Friends ask if I ever missed the before. Before the betrayal, before the courtroom, before the fight. You don't. Because what came after wasn't just survival. It was authorship. I stopped being the girl waiting for love that had conditions. I stopped asking for space in hearts that only knew how to hoard affection and weaponize silence. I made room for my own voice. And now it fills every chapter. Sometimes I sit on the back porch, coffee in hand. Sunrise over the garden my mother used to dream about. I think about how far I've come, from unwanted to undeniable. And I'm not angry. I'm not bitter. I'm free. Because real family isn't who shares your blood or your house. It's who roots for your healing, speaks your name with pride, and never asks you to shrink so they can shine. I used to think I had to fight for love. Now I know. I only had to stop accepting its imitation. They tried to rewrite my story in their image. I took back the pen and signed it in full.